History allows us to look back, to reevaluate where we have been, what errors we committed, and the things we did well.
From colonialism, which is, widespread across Africa, to the war that happened and to other events that have shaped our socio-economic status today.
Our continuous refusal to look back at history and learn from it is what is holding us back in this country.
Events in our history do have a role to play in how we live and exist in our society today.
Any nation that believes it cannot learn from history will never progress.
Welcome to Honestly Speaking, a podcast where we have conversations about issues shaping our lives and our nation, Sierra Leone. I am Antonia Howard, and in this episode, we are exploring the direct link between our past and our present, from colonial structures that still shape governance today to unresolved memories of the war that affect how people and communities relate to each other today. And so we're asking first, how do we remember our past? And secondly, can we truly write a new story if we're still haunted by the ghosts of the old one? So, my guest today is a historian, a lawyer, and an author whose work confronts the silences in Sierra Leone's past and also challenges us to reckon with memory, with truth, and justice. Joseph Kaifala.
Yes, ma'am.
Welcome to Honestly Speaking.
Thank you.
I'm happy to have you because many of the episodes we've had on the podcast kind of draw us back to what happened during the war, all the events that we've had in our history. Sierra Leone's history is quite eventful, and some of the work that you do, part of the work that you do first is reclaiming that history, telling it from our own perspective. So I'll start there. Why is it important why does it matter who tells the story?
Well, so the thing about stories is that everybody tells it from their own perspective, and often the default drive is to make sure that the story you are telling benefits you. It is difficult to be a true advocate storyteller, especially when it comes to historical events. People want to tell stories that makes them look good. And if the story doesn't elevate their own reputation, it is often twisted and told in a different way. And therefore, it is important who tells the story. I mean, in Africa, we tend to say that the story of the hunt will be different if hunters had their own historians.
That's very true. And for us in Sierra Leone, most of our history, I would say, is not written by us. We read about it. Sometimes we learn about it through other mouthpieces who are definitely not looking to glorify our own part, the part that we played. Why is reclaiming the narrative an important part of nation building? How will that contribute to national growth?
So primarily Europeans enslaved us, the British colonized us, and they wrote our history books. Those history books were never about elevating Sierra Leone. It was about repositioning the British place in our history so that we continue to pay homage to them long after they have left. Therefore, reclaiming the narrative is important because it is about self-worth. If your history positions you as the central figure, you get a little bit of self awareness, self respect, and a dignifying narrative. That is why it is important that we reclaim our narrative and tell our own history so that we can properly understand who we are as a people. If we do not reevaluate ourselves, We only go by the narrative of others, which doesn't necessarily uh, put us in good light. That's one of the reasons I became a historian, because I felt it was important that as a Sierra Leonean, I revisit our past and make sure that we properly understand where we have been through our own lens.
Mm. And do you think um, citizens have been able to, because that's part of citizenship, right?
Mm.
That's part of being a patriotic citizen, understanding your identity and fulfilling those obligations that you have as a citizen. Do you think we've been able to do that properly as a Sierra Leonean society?
We have not been able to do that properly as a Sierra Leonean society because generally we don't even study our history. We have become very disinterested in our past. Uh, in our school system, we don't teach history generally for everyone. The curriculum is changing now a little bit, but back in the day, if you don't go to the art stream, you will never study history. So we graduate without not only understanding our past historically, but we don't even know our heroes.
Mm.
And because we don't know our heroes, we don't have people who can inspire us to do better. Because the purpose of history is to help us learn from the past, avoid the errors of the past that held us back, and improve on the successes of the past in order to build the future. But if we're not even learning that, we don't also learn about people who selflessly committed themselves into the pursuing things that could benefit the nation. Even the few heroes that we know by Bure, we don't even understand by Bure's story. We
Mm.
have a very simplistic perspective of Baibure and what he did. People tend to regularly sing a song that says Baibure hated the British. Baibure did not hate the British. Baibure fought because he had to defend himself. So it is important that we embrace history so that we can learn from the past as we aspire to build a better future.
But many people don't see it that way. I think Boku of we they see history as something we don't pass. Just that something we don't pass, and we have nothing to learn from it. We don't investigate what happened in our past that we may be repeating now. That could be dangerous for the future. So, what would you say is the cause of that? Why aren't we interested in investigating our history?
Now, I think primarily love of history depends on leadership.
Mm.
You create the space for children to learn their history. And as they grow, they begin to get more and more interested in their cultures and tradition and the heroes who fought for their good. This is not done by magic. And this is why fanatics and people who are extreme nationalists succeed in their drives to mobilize people because they go into history, skew the history for them so that they can mobilize them. We don't do that for the benefit of the nation. And any nation that believes it cannot learn from history will never progress.
Mm.
To be able to move forward in a constructive way, we ought to re-examine the past. Just like philosophers would often say about individual human perspective that an unexamined life is not worth living, is the same with history.
Mm.
History allows us to look back, to reevaluate where we have been, what errors we committed, and the things we did well. If we cannot do that, and our continuous refusal to look back at history and learn from it is what is holding us back in this country. Because if you look at this country historically, we keep making the same mistakes.
Mm.
We have no aspirations because we have no heroes to look up to, because we have not learned about the heroes who brought us thus far. Many Sierra Leoneans don't even understand the struggles of Sir Milton Magai. They only know that he was this country's first prime minister, as if he fell from the sky to become a prime minister. We don't know our heroes. We don't know our history. We keep moving and carrying on in a vacuum.
And our history, like I said, is quite eventful. Um, from colonialism, which is, widespread across Africa, to the war that happened and to other events that have shaped our socio-economic status today. Um, would you say we still have unresolved memories, maybe unresolved memories or traumatic experiences that, if investigated, could possibly shape the way we move forward, shape the future in a better way?
We are a deeply traumatized nation, moving around with wounds and scars that we have refused to investigate and make sure that we heal properly. We do this sometimes because we are afraid of what we might discover if we look back into our past. Some of us might be afraid of our role into the creation of that trauma. Some of us are afraid of confronting the demons that we think we have left behind. From the days of colonialism, we can even go as far back as the days of enslavement on this continent, and to civil wars, natural disasters. We all have a traumatic story within us, even those who have not taken the time to even reflect on what they have gone through. The most recent one being that very brutal civil war that we survived. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission said that every Sierra Leonean was affected by that conflict one way or another, directly or indirectly. But when the Civil War ended, we were told to go home and forgive and forget. So no one put constructive effort into trauma healing, counseling, and making sure that we create a platform where our suffering, our trauma was not shameful. In fact, we took proactive effort to conceal and bury our trauma, because that's the idea of forgive and forget, which is a very deliberate and intentional statement that was put forward by our leaders immediately after the war, because they did not want to invest into our collective healing process. So even those who do not want to forget feel that they cannot now remember, because if you do, you violate this national principle that was brought forth after the conflict, that you're the only one in this society who refuses to forget when everyone have chosen to forget. And that's a very terrible situation to find oneself in. But remembrance is a fundamental part of our existence. And we are a Christian and Islamic society. I keep telling people that the Jesus Christ they worship knew the importance of remembrance. That is why when he knew that his time was up, he organized a Last Supper. At that Last Supper, he offered food and drinks and told his disciples to do this in memory of him. Because he knew if he did not leave that instruction, there would have been no Christianity. Because Christianity really is just a memorial for Jesus Christ, which is why every Sunday we go to Mass and we eat communion so that we do not forget the suffering and death of Jesus Christ, which we as Christians might believe that is the source of our salvation.
And if we are to really investigate the past and, as you said, invest in understanding our history, perhaps understanding the role that we played in some of the events that happened, and put in effort in national healing, what kind of future do you think um, that would hold for Sierra Leone?
Look, no society will develop the way it wants if it exists on past trauma. That is why every nation in the world that has undergone mass atrocity has Remembrance Day, commemorations, and sites of conscience.
Mm.
Even on the African continent, the Rwandans know this, the South Africans know this, because unless we go back, as Desmond Tutu used to say, open the wound, clean it, it won't heal properly. And that is what we need as a society. We need to open our hearts, reevaluate the trauma that exists, make sure we heal together. As soon as we have that clean slate, we will know how to move forward as a country.
Mm.
Generally, we are sick and we're refusing to go to the hospital. We think the sickness will merely go away.
When you say we're sick, what does that mean? Like, how does that sickness, as you put it, how does it show up in our everyday lives or maybe in our um, governance or even how we engage as citizens?
Now, listen, you see, trauma manifests itself in various forms. I keep telling people that we have been forced to internalize our trauma. When you internalize trauma for so long, it forces itself out. You only need to spend 5 minutes downtown Freetown to realize that we are all unwell. People overreact to very little things that require a mere I am sorry. But in this society, even saying I'm sorry is a very big endeavor. Uh, People will scream and yell and scream and yell simply to avoid saying I am sorry. Our leaders get angry so easily at their constituents when they are supposed to be the leaders maintaining a cool and calm composure. They are often on social media fighting with people who are expressing their grievances. So we lose a sense of leadership because we ourselves are traumatized and aggravated. So when a citizen says, I don't have drinking water, instead of saying, we're sorry about that, we're working on this, these are the constraints, we say, get out of here, your sentiment is invalid. Because our trauma, our own experiences, put us into an antagonistic reaction to others because we refuse to allow ourselves to heal from our own problems.
Mm.
So, this trauma, this existing trauma, the underlying trauma that we carry is affecting our leadership. And when the leadership structure of a society is not as it should be, it is not level headed, the society cannot progress because the leadership of a country is its head.
Mm.
Citizens vote in what we political scientists call a social contract. The citizens are telling their leaders, we cannot lead ourselves, we trust you to lead us. But if the leader itself is not carrying the level headedness that is required for leadership, the society cannot progress. So we ought to put some effort into our healing from the various traumas that we carry.
Right.
Our people are unwell, but we refused to accept that.
I was about to talk about that because this isn't the first time I've talked about trauma on this podcast. And sometimes it's not even intentional. For instance, I was having a conversation about customer service with Edlin Elba, and the issue of trauma came up. And looking at the response of the public, those who have access to the internet, who saw the episode, who saw some of the clips that were put out, there is a resistance or refusal um, we are yet to accept that um, we are traumatized, whether we were alive when the war happened, whether we were here or not, that events in our history do have a role to play in how we live and exist in our society today. And I think when we talk about the younger generation, I just had another conversation about youth leadership. Um, there is an expectation now amongst young people to step into leadership, to innovate, to basically take up the responsibility of moving the nation forward, because young people make up over 50%, and I'm talking about those under the age of 35,
Mm.
make up over 50% of the population. So, what role do we have as young people to properly investigate our past and to carve a future that would be better for every one of us in Sierra Leone?
I think we are diverting the blame to young people.
Mm,
What young people need in this country is leadership and inspiration. We, the older folks, are the ones with the obligation to create platforms where these young people can be inspired into better citizenship.
mm,
But what we do is we antagonize them. We are not listening to them properly. And when you don't listen to people and they are constantly bringing forth the same issues and you are constantly either evading or antagonizing the issue, they become aggravated and they react. And you can never predict how people's reactions are manifested. So, what we ought to do as older folks in society, as leaders into society, is to listen to the young people and to be intentional about creating platforms where we can guide and lead them, create a sense of citizenship in them. There's no sense of patriotism in Sierra Leone anymore because we're not teaching that. Ask any young people who inspires you. There might be one of you of us who might inspire them, but most often they have no one to look up to because our society itself is full of hypocrisy, corruption, and lack of morals and ethics. We claim to be a religious society. I always say that is itself is hypocrisy. We are not a religious society. And I can provide evidence of why we are not a religious society and we are not offering proper guidance to younger folks in this country. If you claim to be a religious society, religion teaches you various moral ways of life, right? The Christianity teaches you the Ten Commandments, and in Islam there are various doctrines that draws us nearer to charity and kindness. Now you claim to be a religious society. Corruption is one of our greatest problems. If you are truly a religious society, why do we have such huge problem with corruption? Teenage pregnancy, rape, all these immoral things that Christians who said were only represented in Sodom and Gomorrah is what is happening in our society. But we don't question them because even in our religiosity, we are hypocrites.
mm,
On Sundays, we will dress nicely, go to church. On Monday, we go to the offices and steal the nation's money. On Fridays, we'll wear our fantastic gowns and go to the mosques. On Thursday, we are giving 12-year-old children to a 60-year-old man to marry. So we're not even good at this religion that we profess.
mm,
That is the problem. So the young people are not the problem. It is our responsibility to teach young people the way they should grow. We are the ones who are failing. So these kids are constantly holding us accountable. And because we feel the guilt of their call for accountability, we react. This is the typical behavior in Sierra Leone. When they tell us something that is truthful and honest, instead of dealing with the issue, we get mad. We scream and we yell and we exchange insults. And at the end of the day, we do not resolve the
Yeah,
issues.
nothing happens. We don't take action. But I also wonder if the past affects young people in that way, in the sense that regardless of whether you were alive during the war or you're just being born 15 years ago, um, what possible effects um, does that trauma have on today's young people,
Of
today's
course,
youth?
we are transmitting the trauma that we experience to our children. One of the first things I encourage Dr. David Senget to do when he was Minister of Education is to remove corporal punishment from the educational system. Because I visit schools across this country, I see people who are deeply traumatized teaching in these schools. And these men and women will be flogging other people's children as though they were criminals just for coming 5 minutes late. That is trauma manifesting itself on children. Parents don't know how to parent because they carry deep rooted trauma. And because they don't know how to parent, they think the best way to raise your child is to brutalize that child for very simple things. So that child itself, the child is also now going to grow up with trauma from this domestic violence that they have endured at home. Rape was used as a weapon of war in this country. When civil war ended, rape has become a major problem in our society. These are all the unresolved issues being manifested in our society and transmitted to the next generation of Sierra Leoneans, and they too might transmit that trauma to their own children. And unless we deal with this trauma and break that chain effect, we will not succeed in fixing this country in the next 2 generations. Every time we manifest our trauma, we destroy the very things that we have spent many years building. We burn school buses, we burn buildings, we brutalize one another in ways that are unimaginable. So this is trauma manifesting and getting transmitted from generation to generation.
Hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting. I now now that I'm doing this podcast, I'm also very interested in, understanding the past, because one of the goals of this podcast is to help people to think about what's happening today, about our own role in not just understanding what had happened before, but our own role in shaping what happens now and what happens in the future for our children, for our grandchildren. Um, and one of the things you are asking for is it a national reconciliation? Is it reconciliation or
Yes.
uh, reconciliation day? Why is that important for you?
Now here's the truth. I am not the one asking for a National Reconciliation Day. When the Civil War ended in this country, we did a very fantastic thing. In fact, it was one of the most important things that were included in our peace agreement,
Mm.
the Lome Peace Agreement. Remember, the Lome Peace Agreement did not make any provision for criminal prosecution of those who were involved in the Sierra Leonean Civil War. What it said was that we should create a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And we did that. We created the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 2002 to provide an impartial historical record of the conflict and profile recommendations. The TRC in this country did a fantastic job. If you read the volumes of report that they produce, you realize that that was one of the best part of the end of our civil war.
Mm.
Now, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission said that we will not be able to provide material reparation for everyone who was affected by the Sierra Leonean Civil War. The country is poor. It would be impossible. So, in addition to material reparation for a few categories of victims, the Commission recommended that we engage in symbolic reparation activities. Among these symbolic reparation activities was a recommendation to proclaim January 18, the date that the Sierra Leonean Civil War was declared over in 2002, as National Reconciliation Day, so that every year on this day, we can come together and engage in community peace building activities and to also create a platform for collective healing. The TRC did the groundwork that would encourage us to continue to deal with the past, because every sensible person knows that you do not simply walk away from the trauma of mass atrocities, that we will need many years, many generations of having to deal with this. And therefore, the recommendation was that we proclaim a National Reconciliation Day to facilitate this symbolic reparation mechanism for collective healing.
Mm. And the TRC recommended many things, which some of some of which we see underway today. Um, we've seen some moves in trying to, like most of the institutions that exist today, were recommended by the TRC to promote accountability, um, checks and balances in power, and institutions that would limit corruption, um, and reparations are, I would say, one of the key things that you advocate for that haven't really been touched yet when it comes to the TRC. Why is that important?
Look, the Sierra Leonean Civil War was one of the most brutal civil wars in the world at the time that it was happening. We engaged in very extreme, deliberate, depraved violence against one another. And we have people living not only with the mental scars, but the physical scars of that violence. The TRC did an investigation and realized, as I mentioned earlier, that in fact, the whole country, and even some of our people who are living abroad, would need a certain reparation. But the country cannot afford it. So, what it did was to categorize victims based on their victimization. So, people like child soldiers, rape and sexual assault victims, amputees, and other war wounded. These people will live with the scars of their of their victimization for many years. And therefore, the TRC recommended that we must take care of them essentially. It's as simple as that. If you walk down the streets of Freetown now, you will see many amputees walking around begging in the streets because we have not created the mechanism that requires us to take care of them. And this is something that is morally wrong. We have simply moved on because some of us walked out of that civil war better than others. And the one person who understood the predicament of these war victims left power just before he could implement the reparation mechanisms. So when you speak to the Amputees and War Wounded Association, they will show you a document that they are carrying around. It was the last cabinet paper of President Ahmadinejad Kaba's government that provided very basic things for them: monthly stipend, free public transportation, free medical care, because these are the things that they need to continue to survive, even with the pain that they continue to carry.
Mm.
That is why reparation is very important. It is appalling that as a society, we have not made this an imperative responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, we were told to forgive and forget, and trying not to forget would be seen as, going against the grain. But then don't say, "Oh, forgive and forget." With you, they can't talk about this
Right.
again for. Um, and I just wonder what the risks of that are. The risk of pretending not to remember.
Well, the risk of pretending not to remember is the internalization of trauma.
Hmm.
But like I said from the very beginning, trauma operates in such a way that when you internalize it for so long, it has a way of forcing itself out beyond your control,
Yeah.
which is exactly what we see in our streets, in our villages. I mean, people are stealing transformers that are meant to provide electricity to their area. People are stealing solar panels that are supposed to provide street lights in their area. People are removing machines that are supposed to provide water for their community, destroying them. In the provinces, people are actually digging roads so that vehicles can break down in their village so that they can make some money. These are all such traumatic behavior in the society that seeks to develop. So our refusal to deal with our trauma in our past is coming out. It's manifesting itself on a daily basis. But the idea of forgetting is such a privileged statement. And on behalf of the amputees and other war victims, I always say, how do you forget that you were raped? How do you forget that your hands were brutally chopped off with machetes in this country? How do you forget that as a small boy, you stood outside and watched the rest of your family uh, burn to death in a building? How do you forget that as a child you were forced to kill your parents? No one forgets these things. So people who walk around saying in Sierra Leone we have chosen to forgive and forget are very heartless people, I must say.
Mm. Wow, that's actually very, very deep, and it's concerning. When you look at what's happening in Sierra Leone today, we sometimes don't connect these things to our past. We pretend to forget so much that we actually believe that we have forgotten. But things that happen in our society, really, as you said, they show that we haven't really dealt with the trauma of what happened during the war. And if we are to truly progress as a nation, I really believe that we need to address some of these
Look,
things.
let me say this. I think we're just intentionally wicked to ourselves.
Mm.
Our leaders attend a commemoration of the Holocaust at the United Nations. Our leaders wear puppies on every puppy day in this country. When our leaders visit Rwanda, the first thing they do is to go to the Kigali Memorial. When we go to South Africa, we go to the Apartheid Museum. We visit Nelson Mandela's prison. We know the value of dealing with the past. There's a heightened level of hubris to think that in our own society, we are immune from the effects of a violent past. That is all it is. That is what aggravates me. Because sometimes you want to reduce it to the fact that, oh, our society just doesn't understand. So let me be the teacher. Let me lead on this matter. And then you realize that We participate. We remember the Holocaust. We remember other traumatic past in other places.
I mean, we do celebrate the Day of the African Child, which is something that happened in.
And
Uh,
all I am asking for, this commission you spent millions of dollars to create has told you that you need a National Reconciliation Day to deal with your past.
mm,
And sometimes I am saying this and feeling like, the madman in the wilderness who is saying something his society is not ready to comprehend. But it is easier to wake a man who is truly asleep than one who's merely pretending to sleep. Our society is only pretending we know.
yeah, that's interesting. Um, I think we also, as citizens, need to demand. Like you said, you cannot be the only voice asking for this. Um, we need to do our own part to understand what happened during the war. If we aren't being taught in schools, we need to do our own investigation. We need for learn for we self and understand also we self go play for lay we next generation understand for let them self not forget, and so that we are able to rewrite the story, so that we are able to create a better future for Sierra Leone. And I think that would be the last question I would ask. What do you think would change most about how we live as Sierra Leoneans if we truly confront the past?
I think we cannot achieve our development agenda. We cannot achieve the peaceful society that we seek. We cannot create the sort of society where we truly love one another if we fail to address the trauma of the past. Our civil war was extremely violent. It has left us wounded and we have not healed. And until we heal, we will not be able to mentally confront the challenges of our underdevelopment. This country is not poor. We have enormous resources. But because the people who are supposed to use these resources for our development are unwell, even our creativity is not up to its utmost level. We are satisfied with mediocrity. We do not push ourselves further than we should. And at every opportunity, someone steals because they believe they are vindicated by the fact that anyone else in that position will steal. So we ought to address these underlying issues of our existence. We will not get anywhere if we do not deal with the past.
Hmm.
Because we are unwell. This is a sick society. Many of our leaders in office now participated or survived the Civil War. They lost people. Many were tortured. They never received any therapy or counseling. I was able to heal because I studied philosophy and I discovered certain philosophers who helped me heal. But some of our leaders never even receive any form of education pertaining to their traumatization. So they are in power exercising their traumatic power.
Hmm.
And therefore, the society is affected by that. And that is why we are stagnated. Like any sickness, the beginning of healing is acceptance. That is the most difficult thing we are confronting in this society. We don't want to accept that we are traumatized.
Hmm.
And until we do that, we will not be able to create the platform to heal. But once we accept that we are traumatized, we are unwell, we will, of course, now take the TRC recommendations seriously. because everything is there. The TRC truly set out to help us heal. So then, when we embrace that, we will invest. It requires investment. We will invest in our collective healing, which we're not doing. That's why I am often walking around like a madman, because I'm trying to tell this nation that we are sick, let's see a doctor. And everyone is telling me that, my friend, you're the one with the sickness.
I wonder what role religion plays in that, because, as you said, we often claim the identity as a religious nation, um, and one of the things that happens in society today is when you get diagnosed with something, you cancel it. In fact, not when you, if you accept that you're traumatized, you're declaring it over your life, like, and many people do not accept on the grounds of religion.
That is true. And in fact, again, we are a very religious, tolerant society, so I find difficulty discussing religion, but reason is reason. Here is the fact. The reason the colonizers brought religion with them is because it makes us into passive human beings. However, even these religious books are telling us to seek healing. Now, what our churches are doing is to remove themselves from the eschatological purpose for which they were created to focus on the material purpose of society. And therefore, whatever keeps people in an irrational position is what benefits them. So we become passive citizens, not putting any effort into our own material development. If you tell your sick congregant to go to the hospital, to go seek psychotherapy, they will not buy anointing oil. In this country, when children want to go take exam, they bring their pens and pencils to the church for pastor to pray on it so they can get an A. If prayer helped us pass exam, there would be no need for school. We can all just sit in our living rooms and pray to the dear Lord Mighty that we want to be intelligent and we will all be okay. No one would go to school. So what I'm trying to say is that we ought to rationally accept that we have a problem. And our governance structure, the way we have built society, requires that the people we put in power help us deal with it. That is what social contract means. It's a contract. We vote you into office so that you can help us solve our collective problem. And the moment we start to look rationally at our leadership, at our society, we start to hold each other accountable. Yeah. And that is what we are not doing. And until we do that, holding each other accountable, thief na thief. If na you papa do as if. Yeah, but it is true. You see, let me take you back to one moment in this country when the Anti-Corruption Commission, now forget for a moment about the basics of what they did. But the Anti-Corruption Commission put a bunch of teachers under the cotton tree. I have never seen this nation so outraged. Now, if you look at it on the surface, you would say they were standing up for their human rights. You would say, the fundamental right, that is what the people are outraged about. No, it's not. Why are we not outraged about FGM when 5-year-old girls are being mutilated all across this country? But we were outraged because almost everyone in this country has a teacher in their family. And it could end up being their uncles and aunties standing under that cotton tree. That's why we were outraged, because we could now see ourselves in this accountability process. Our uncle, the one who's stealing to help us at home, could be standing there. That was the outrage. It was not about human rights. But that's the hypocrisy of this society, because We only complain about things like corruption because the next guy is benefiting. When our own party comes to power and our uncles are now ministers, corruption is not an issue. Anyway, I'll leave it there.
I know we could continue this conversation on and on. So, Miss Efagolefaya, I would leave it here so we don't record a 5-hour episode. But thank you so much for your time. I hope that what we've talked about, this conversation would really help people to think, to remember, and not to just do that, but to act as well, because that's also another important thing. Not just for us to think and remember and to just bear it in mind, but for us to do something about it. So thank you for your
Thank
time.
you.
Thank you for making it to Honestly Speaking. That's it for today's episode of Honestly Speaking. Thank you for listening and being a part of these important conversations. If you've enjoyed today's discussion, please like and share. And if you're feeling inspired, do leave a review. I'd love to hear what you think. And of course, carry on the conversation online. Share your thoughts, experiences, and ideas using #HonestlySpeakingSL. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and stay honest.